Thanks so much for joining us at Restart Church. It's our honor and privilege to be serving you today. Lord bless you as you go, and we're so grateful that you tuned in. We know you got a million things you could be doing, but you're taking time to join us, and we're going to be talking about Palm Sunday today. And it's a really important thing. There's no question about that, right? It's called Palm Sunday in the church. And so how many times does the phrase Palm Sunday occur in the Bible? Okay, we got one person said 0, and all of the rest of you said, well, duh, what kind of a dumb question is that? Did you think that? Okay, Sage is on my side. Thank you. All right? But the richness of this day, even though you won't find that phrase in the Bible, the richness of this day cannot be lost upon us. It's the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. Had he ever been to Jerusalem before? Yes, sounds good. I'm working with yes. And if you said no, that's okay. That's okay, because none of us know everything. And we're allowed not to know the answer to that. And you're allowed not to know where the book of Micah is. Good luck with that. Getting into the table of contents, right? And it's the first time for that. So don't worry that you didn't know that answer. But it's not his first time. But he's coming in on a special ride. He's coming in special. But I wanted today to look at this through the lens of the Old Testament. Through the lens of the Old Testament, and here's how that's going to look. Boom. Now there's 7 feasts that have been ordered in the Old Testament, right? For the nation of Israel to observe. There's 3 feasts in the fall, and then there's one 7 weeks later, plus a day, 50 days. Well, we'll get into Pentecost later. 50 days. And then there's 3 more feasts that are in the fall, beginning in the month of Tishri, which is in the September, October-ish sort of time frame. But now we're in the spring, so we'll start right here. And the first one is called Passover. Is that a familiar term to everybody, right? We're going to do a Passover Seder in this building, in this room, on Friday, this coming week. You are welcome to come if you haven't signed up. Misty doesn't even know that she'll be doing some reading. She's walking in the room right now. Right? So we're going to give her 2 readings because she's a minute late. Actually, in this church, you're right on time, hon, so that's okay because we don't know what we're doing in this place. Right? All right, so the Passover is a very important feast. The second feast is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then lastly, the third one is called the Feast of First Fruits. First fruits, isn't that a curious title, isn't it? So we're going to dig into that a little bit. I think it'll be very helpful, in fact, to dig in just to help us have a better understanding about this whole triumphal entry business, okay? So let's look at the top level. We're going to visit about the Passover first. Now, there's a ton going on with the Passover. There's a lot happening in that whole story. The Jews are in Egypt, and Moses, was he a little cowardly or was he Mr. Brave? Cowardly. He was afraid. He says, I can't do this, send somebody else. That sounds a lot like me, actually. And so what God did, he had Aaron actually go forth and be the mouthpiece for him to help him get the job done. But God says, I want my people out of Egypt, out of bondage, out of slavery. I want them out of there. And so God said all kinds of stuff to make that happen. So let's talk a little bit about that. Now, the first thing to remember is that in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight is the Lord's Passover. God has designated a specific day, a day. The very first day in this calendar month is Nisan. Not like the car dealer, but not a bad way to remember that, okay? So the 14th of Nisan, now we could read a little farther and found out that it's called a high Sabbath, a holy convocation. We know that there's a Sabbath in the Jewish studies, right? Starts on Friday night at twilight, about 6 p.m. for our use here, and it goes for 24 hours because the Jewish day starts at night. Why is that? Because the Lord said in Genesis what? The evening and the morning were the first day. The Jewish day starts at twilight and then proceeds to the day. So that's going to factor for us. But you see, just like your birthday, this event can end up on any day of the week. Right? Because it says the 14th of Nisan. So the date is specified. And so it's consequently, year to year, it's going to move around a little bit. right? And so here's the interesting thing that we need to note, that because it moves around a little bit, it might be on a weekday, and you have a high holy Sabbath on a weekday, but then you have your normal Sabbath on Friday. So you'll have 2 Sabbaths in the same week. So let's take a look at how that might look. Okay, so here's our example month. Expertly graphed, I might add. Yeah, all right. So let's look at the 14th of Nisan. Let's just say that it lands on a Wednesday, okay? Everyone good with that? It lands on a Wednesday. So there's our Passover, and that means, since we talked about this, that the normal Sabbath then is going to take place on a Thursday and Friday. Start on Friday night, go through Saturday. Who corrected me there? Thank you very much. Whoever said that. Did you say that? My bride. Now there's something I'm not used to. That's a real shock, right? I deserve it most of the time, though. This woman's unbelievable. If everyone had a bride like Judy, man, I'm telling you, the whole world would be a better place. Okay, so there's going to be 2 Sabbaths on this given week that way, and you can see that, right? Now that's very important. My voice just squeaked. Very important. I'm 64 years old. Like 50 years ago, I went through all that, right? What is going on here, right? Okay. It's good to start about the Passover, because what's the story? Oh, the angel of death comes over, right? And they got to put blood on the lintels and the doorposts and that whole story. We're not going to go into all that. That story is very, very deep. But let's springboard now into the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's our second feast. Well, it's another thing to note is that this feast lasts 7 days. 7 days. Now, this day will be a memorial to you, the Lord talks. And you shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Does that mean we don't celebrate it today? No, it means we celebrate today. The Jewish family, those who pay attention to the teaching of the Torah, will celebrate this feast. They do it. Throughout your generations, celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. God didn't say, hey, that means the Old Testament applies, guys. It's an Old Testament ordinance, but it's going through today. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. So it begins the evening after our Passover Sabbath, which on our little chart, it looks like this. That's where we started from, right? So it begins the evening after on Thursday. Right? So you have the Passover day on Wednesday, and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread would begin the next day. Everyone pretty good so far? Don't worry, it's going to get worse. Okay? So now, like the Passover itself, there's a whole bunch more instruction going on there, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread is full of turns, lefts and rights and such, but we'll stop right there just for now, and we're going to touch on that third feast. It's called the Feast of First Fruits. Now, this Feast of First Fruits occurs actually during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's kind of unusual that way. Let's turn to, you wouldn't have to turn to Leviticus, here it is right there. You shall bring in the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. And he'll wave that sheaf before the Lord for you to be accepted on the day after the Sabbath. Okay? So what this is, the priest stands there, and it's the wheat harvest. And they bring the first cuttings of that wheat harvest, and they wrap it up into a sheath, and they hand it to the priest, and the priest waves it before the Lord, honoring the fact that this is the first fruits of the harvest. Lord, we recognize that this is the first. We recognize that this is special. We're grateful for it, and we're making a special thing. And notice, it's the day after the Sabbath. So if we return to our picture, that puts it on Sunday. So the Feast of First Fruits is on a Sunday. Now that's interesting. All this is if you're a bookworm, but believe me, my application's coming. But for completeness' sake, let's one more thing about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We said that it lasted for 7 days, so that's to continue our little chart to show that it started on a Thursday and would end on a Wednesday. Everyone good with that? And in the middle is this first fruits business. Okay. All right, we're going to have a 60s moment here. Time for a flashback. It says, do anyone remember the Daniel series? Was that too far back for you when we went through the book of Daniel, right? I think there's only 6 of us in the room and we sat around a fire with skins on. It just seems that way, huh? Oh, I had something, but Big Daddy's holding that back. Okay, so we studied a prophecy of Daniel's that foretold the coming of the Messiah. Pretty cool, right? Let's take a look at that. It's in Daniel chapter 9, it says, so you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Okay, hold a minute. What? Daniel's talking about rebuilding Jerusalem. Where is Daniel at this moment? He's in Babylon, right? Jerusalem is crumbled. The walls are breached. They were eating their children during the siege. It was horrible. Although some of you people look pretty tasty to me. Okay, just made that part up. So he's in Babylon, and he's grieving over Jerusalem, and God tells him there's going to be a decree to restore and rebuild it. Okay? And it says, okay, you're going to come from this date, from this decree, to what? What does this mean? Well, he finishes it off. He says, until the Messiah, the Prince, comes. So from the day that God says, okay, it's time to rebuild Jerusalem, and a decree's offered by the Persians and the Medes, until Messiah comes, will be this business with the weeks. We're going to touch on that week stuff in a minute. But just think a minute. Excuse me. Look at this. That was my quick prayer. So until Messiah the Prince. Now you got to think what that means. Messiah, right? We meet this promise of Messiah in the very beginning of Genesis. You want to come on? Come here. Right? Here's the Lord speaking to the devil. Right? I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. Now check this out, between her seed. That in the Hebrew it literally means the sperma of the woman. The sperma of the woman. Actually, it talks about the male component, which ultimately is Jesus Christ himself, from the Messiah. And he shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. Isn't that a prophecy of Jesus? Yeah, Christ was crucified by you, but he's going to bruise the devil on the head when it comes for him to take a little dip in the lake of fire later on. Isn't that something? Mm-hmm. Are you tired or just my preaching? A little of both. Check this verse out, Genesis 49. You want to sit this way or you want to go down? It's up to you. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Going down. See you later. Don't monkey with that thing. Okay, you're monkeying. Less monkeying, less monkeying. There you go. Thank you. Kids, dogs, and little old ladies. I'm like a magnet. I've never been that good with women. Okay. Now you know what happened, kids. All right. Notice it says Judah. At this point in the story, Genesis 49, Israel is still alive. He's still breathing. But to Abraham, his big daddy, said, hey, God said, I'm going to make a nation out of you. It's going to last forever. It's going to be unbelievable. And all you got to do is believe. And he believed. But at this point in time, the firstborn is a guy named Reuben. And so by the Jewish tradition, all the firstborn gets all the goods. But he didn't, did he? Why? Because he had a problem and he sinned. And ultimately, it goes to Judah. Who is the Lion of Judah? Christ himself. All right? Another one. 2 Samuel, God speaking to the King David. She's doing okay except for the stage part, probably. You know, I think instruments are expensive. Not sure. Aren't moms something, right? Go mom. Boom. Nice job. All right, 2 Samuel, God speaking to King David. I will raise up your descendant after you who will come forth from you. I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I'll establish his throne of his kingdom forever. This is what it means to Messiah. When the Jew looks at Messiah, he thinks of stuff like this. Check this out. For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us. Notice this. The humanity of the gift, a child will be born, and the divinity of the gift, a son will be given. Two different things. And the government will rest on his shoulders. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. This is what the Jew thinks when he thinks about Messiah. That's what's in his little noodle. That's what he's thinking about in those days. And at that time I'll cause a righteous branch of David to spring forth, and he shall execute justice and righteousness on the earth. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just, endowed with salvation, humble, and mounted on a donkey, even the colt, the foal of a donkey. And don't think for a minute, every Jew didn't know this promise. And so when Daniel writes this stuff, and he pens the word Messiah, Prince in there, it's the big deal. It's a big deal. So let's dig into this verse a little bit, okay? All right, he says, hey, you're to know and discern. Does that mean that we don't have any ability to know and discern? Does God ever ask us to do things that he does not empower us to do? That's correct. That applies to every Bible verse you're reading. If he says do X, you're able to do X. I can't feel I do X. I don't have the power. Yes, you do. So he says we're to know and figure this out. So let's take a look. Historical records are very clear. There's ample historical records. The decree to rebuild Jerusalem was issued on March 14th, 445 BC. And it's translated into March. We're not using the Hebrew calendar right now, so you and I can understand. Right? You'll find this in the 2nd chapter of Nehemiah when the decree went out. And so that's our starting point. But our verse continues and says, he talks about 2 weeks and 62 weeks. So 60, what? 69 weeks total, right? So we need more details than that, right? Well, Daniel offers a yardstick now by using this 62 weeks. Now, it's meaningless to suggest that from the time the decree goes out until the time of Messiah was going to be 62 weeks, right? That's less than 2 years. And that's not what it was about, right? But Daniel, might have still been alive. But now if you approach a week as a grouping of 7, a week is a grouping of 7, right? So 1 week might be 7 years. Stick with me here. How long is a year? Well, it's a bunch of weeks, right? So 1 year is 360 days. We're using the Jewish calendar, right? 360 days in the Jewish calendar. We have Gregorian calendar has 365 and a quarter days, right? And then every 4 years we add another day in February. Well, the Jews didn't do that. And in fact, God has a wonderful prescription for how to take care of leap year. And they go several years and they add a whole month. A few more years, whole month. But astronomically, it's elegant. Astronomically, it's more precise. It's really cool. Anyway, so we're using the Gregorian calendar here, but it's 360 days in a year, right? So let's do some math. Everybody, who likes math? Oh, my granddaughter loves math, don't you, honey? All right. 69 weeks, 7 times 360 is just about 174,000 days. It's a lot of days. So from the issue of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah Prince is that many days. So if you start with the time that the decree was issued, March 14th, what are you going to get? You add the 173,000 days, and boom! You get April 6th, 32 AD. That's what you get. So what do we know about that date? Well, we can use meticulously kept Hebrew calendar dates to find out what? That it was a Sunday. April 6th, 32 AD is a Sunday. Now, you go to the internet and some people will say a Wednesday, but some people think the Earth's 100 million years old also, and that's messed up. It's 5,776 years old. Another discussion. April 6th is Sunday, and a Sunday is 4 days before the Passover of that same year. Right? So now we'll add in the previous chart. There's our April 6th day. There's the Passover beginning on Wednesday, which is what it did begin on that day. All right, that's how it looks. But what's so big a deal about that? Who cares? It doesn't affect me. Yeah, it does. Check this out. It's a Sunday and 4 days before the Passover. And do you know what happens in the Jewish household 4 days before the Passover? I'll tell you what happens. On the 10th of the month, that's the 10th of the month, you're to take one lamb for yourself, according to your father's household, a lamb to every household. So 4 days before the Passover, you're to bring that lamb into your home. It comes to live with you. The Passover is on the 14th. They do this on the 10th, right? You shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. And that's the Passover, right? Keep it at home from the 10th to the 14th. And so what's going to happen with that family living with a, cute little unblemished lamb, right? What's going to happen? I'll tell you what's going to happen. They're going to fall in love with it. It's going to be a pet. They're going to give it a name. Lammykins. Right? It's going to be a family favorite. For 4 days it lives with each family. You'll keep it until the 14th day of the month. 14th day of the month is Passover. And then what? The whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. Rough. Right? Rough. Why would God do this? I've got a suggestion for you. Because that's what he did with his son. He was the Passover lamb. And he wanted us, through the Jewish process here, to fall in love with that sacrifice. That we might love Jesus and caress him and love him only for him to die. So let's summarize this. April 6th is Sunday, the 10th of Nisan, 4 days before the Passover. The sacrificial lamb is presented to the home of each believer. And incidentally, in the days of the temple, the high priest in the temple was given a sacrificial lamb also on behalf of the nation to present to the Lord. And so on that day, the very day that the priest is presenting the Passover lamb in the temple, 4 days before the temple, on that very day, predicted by Jesus, by Daniel, through the Word of God, 500 years earlier, on that very day, Jesus presents himself to Jerusalem, the temple, and to the people as the sacrificial lamb. Or as the word appears in the Torah, the Paschal lamb for the world. On the very day. The large crowd who had come to the feast when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem took branches of the palm trees and went out to meet him and began to shout, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So now what were these people thinking? They were expecting the fulfillment of the prophecies. They thought he was going to come and establish a kingdom. No more Romans, no more taxes, no more pain in the... No more, all gone. It's going to be unbelievable. And they wanted that. They wanted all that. No more tyranny. That's what they were after. But see, Jesus was the Paschal Lamb. When he rode into Jerusalem, he rode in as the sacrifice. He was the Paschal Lamb. He rode in on April 6, 32 AD, to the exact date prophesied by Daniel. And 4 days later, by the prescription of the Torah, he was sacrificed on Wednesday. He lay in the ground 3 full days. Wednesday night to Thursday night. Thursday night to Friday night. Friday night to Saturday night. 3 full nights, just as Jesus himself said, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." That's what happened to him. That's where he was. He laid in the ground 3 full days. But something kind of crazy happened toward the end of the Sabbath. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Sunday, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulcher. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. And when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. But see, this too was ordered by God. This too was foreseen by God, foreseen and specified in the Torah, because that's what happened during the first fruits. "You shall bring in the sheaf of the first fruits to your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord for you to be accepted. On the day after the Sabbath, he will wave it." That's the wave offering. On the very day when the high priest, think about it, he's in the temple, he's doing the wave offering of the first fruits, celebrating that harvest. Jesus was the first fruits alive from the dead. He was the first one to walk from the dead. He's the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself will come to have first place in everything. But now Christ has been risen from the dead, the first fruits of those who are asleep. That's who he was. That's what Palm Sunday is. It's him riding into Jerusalem. We've got a lot to learn from these feasts, you guys. Let's summarize this together, right? This is no mistake. It was written down in the law a long time ago how this would work, right? Jesus said, "Do not think I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I didn't come to abolish, but to fulfill them." And what does that fulfillment mean to you and I? That's what we got to talk about right now. What does it mean to you and I? For why we were still helpless at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. That's right. It says helpless. That's you and me. We're the helpless ones. He rode in on a donkey. The Son of God, who was present at the beginning of the world, at the time of creation, rode in humble on a donkey to present himself on your behalf, on my behalf, as the Paschal lamb to be sacrificed. That's what he did. But God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So what happened at Calvary then? Why did he die like that? Because he canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of decrees. What decrees? All the stuff you do. All the junk you participate in, all the stuff I do, all the shameful behaviors I have done, nailed to the cross. It was hostile to us. He took it out of the way, nailed it to the cross. That's what he did at Calvary. All the cheap and dirty secrets, all the underhanding dealings, all the wretched behaviors, all the guilt trips, all the things we've done, all the poor choices, all the toxins of our lives, nailed to the cross, taken out of the way. That's what he did. And why? That you and I would molder in the grave to live a fruitless life? No, that we might be resurrected in him. That's why it took place. Therefore, we have been buried with him through baptism into death, so that as Jesus Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. But if the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ Jesus from the dead will also do what? Give life to your mortal bodies through his spirit who dwells in you. This is the message of Palm Sunday. Not only that we might honor his journey and what he had to do to get into Jerusalem and what he went through, but that we might travel with him. That we might travel along with him on that journey. The blood of Christ is God's mercy on us, extended, that judgment would pass over us, that the blood of Christ covers us. The angel of death will not molest us. That's the first thing. Secondly, the sin of the world. Now leavening is yeast. What does yeast do? It puffs up. It makes big. He wants us not to be puffed up. In fact, to remove that from us, to take that out of my life, that I might live an unleavened life, a life unburdened by sin. That's the unleavened bread. And then lastly, the first fruits, that we might follow him. He is first fruits, but he has guaranteed, he has told us that we shall live with him. Right now. We don't have to be in that grave anymore. We can be in that grave and be emotionally shot, and there might be 24 reasons why everything that we have been going through would be catastrophic, would be too much for our little shoulders, and we'd be upside down. And I understand that there are some real issues in life. I have the honor of being your pastor, and I'm telling you what, I see a few things in my life now that I hadn't even seen before, relative to the sufferings of his people. It's unbelievable. I don't know how many of you who are looking at me right now can even do it. I don't get it. All I know is that Christ is there with you, just like he's there with me, right? That we might follow him, right? This is what Palm Sunday's all about. Traveling with Jesus. We need to be humble. Like he was on a donkey. He could have rose in on a flaming chariot, right? Remember Elijah? How did he go out in a flaming chariot? Whoa, what a way to go to heaven, right? Woo! First class, flames everywhere, right? Here I come. Jesus could have done that. He could have come in with a flaming chariot, but he rode the foal of a donkey, right? We need to step back from our life of pride. We need to step back from our life of self-indulgence, doing what we want to do because we want to do it. We need to be humble and ride a foal of a donkey in life. That's our first step. And then we need to be brave, right? Look at him, because we got to suffer with him. He had courage. He said, Father, if it's possible, take this cup, but not what I want, man. It's what you want that counts. That's who we got to be. We got to be brave and courageous. We got to suffer the loss of our willpower, of what I want to do, and trade that in to obedience of him. That takes courage. This is not easy. Anyone who thinks it's easy being a Christian is not an idea of what it's like to be a Christian. It's tough business. What's more, we need to remember that we are indeed victorious. We've been raised with him to walk in newness of life. All right, I'm going to say farewell to our E-family at this point. Thank you so much for tuning in to Restart. I just pray that you'll think about what's happening inside your soul right now during this Palm Sunday. That you have been raised with Christ. You have to be that person anymore. You don't resemble that person. And with the power of Christ in you, you're different. You're new. You don't have to be that old person. That yesterday's guilt, yesterday's issues are no longer part of your DNA. That's gone. You've been rebuilt in him, remade new. All things have passed away. All have become new. The old stuff gone. Please feel free to contact us here at Restart. I got babies coming up. Now, you let me hold you, or what's the deal? Not so much? All right, you keep going. Stay away from the drums, that's all. Thank you for tuning in, and may the Lord bless you as you go.